This tutorial was brought to you thanks to the supporters on the screen. Check out TAPgiles.com to find more Dreams resources, donate to support my work, or engage my services to get private instruction or help on a project one-on-one. I made this quick thing so that it emits a whole load of logic at once, which is hard for the engine to do because it's got to make a load of new stuff, and then it hurts the frame rate. So let's make our chip to measure how many frames per second we're getting. And we're going to use a feature of the emitter. So an emitter is usually used to emit stuff. So if you have some stuff, and then we click on Object to Emit and tell it which object to emit, now it will emit that object using the settings we have here. So if we put that to 0 time between emits, then it'll emit one of these every frame, which means 30 frames per second if it's running well. But if it's running less well, then less of these will take longer between when it actually emits it. So what we're going to do, so we can measure it, is let's just press triangle on there and delete the original object. I'm going to make a simple group that contains a tag. So we have a tag and we have a fleck, just a single fleck, which will be helpful a little bit later. And we'll group those up, and we'll have a timeline in there. So we want to know how many times this emitted within a single second. So we can have a timeline that goes for a single second, and we'll turn on ignore frame rate, which will mean this goes as fast as possible and kind of makes up for the loss in frame rate, and will make this more accurate. So we'll put the tag in there, and then we'll destroy this whole thing once we get to 1 second. So if I put a destroyer in the timeline, then as time goes on, when it goes over the gadget that we're talking about, like a destroyer or a keyframe or a sound gadget, then it will power that gadget. That's basically all the timeline does, plus some bells and whistles. So if we put this around 1 second, about there, then when it gets to 1 second, it will power this destroyer. Now if we tweak this destroyer, we can tell it what to actually destroy. So let's scope out and then set the affected objects and link that to the actual group. This is why we've got a fleck in there, because if we just had a couple of timelines and no gadgets and tried to do that, then it will kind of reach through and try to link to one of the gadgets instead of the overall group. So I'll just leave that fleck in there and then link this to the group itself. And you can always just turn this fleck off, but it's useful as like a placeholder to let this stuff work properly. If we play time, then this will run for a second and then destroy itself. So now if we emit one of those every second, about that, you can actually, let's make that fleck visible because it'll be useful for understanding what's happening. So if we play time, so it's emitting one of those flecks every second, and if we speed up you can see gaps between them. But then they're being destroyed. So now if we count how many of these exist at any given time, that's the frame rate of that moment. So let's go over here and get a trigger zone. So we don't really care where it is in the scene, these things that we're emitting. So let's go over here and click on scene, and then things to detect will be tag, because we want to detect this tag, and we'll give that a name. So we'll just call it frame, for example. And then in here you can type the same thing, or you can use up and down on the D-pad to go through the different names of tags in the scene. So if you play time now, this down here is detected, and it will send a signal while it can detect at least this number, the number required. So if we had it required 26, then it'll only start coming on when we get to 26 of those emitted. but we actually want to know how many of these are existing, not just that there is a certain number. There's also this number detected output. So if we put that into a number displayer, we can find out what that is sending out. And I'll move that over there and play time. So it's counting up to the number required. So if we put that to even higher, then restart it so that it takes effect. So now it's actually telling us how many of these tags exist in the scene. And you can put this to something really large, but as we know there's a maximum of 30, it doesn't really matter. So just make sure it's 30 or above, and then it will output how many of those tags exist. And that will be our frame rate. So now you can do things like make it green. Then we can, based on the frame rate that we're detecting, we can make it a different color. So if it's, for example, if we use a calculator, we can find out if that value is below 30, so we're losing frames. And if it is, then we'll change the color using a keyframe. So we can use a keyframe to just set things, and then while that keyframe is powered, those things will be set to whatever the keyframe remembers for it. So it's currently green. If we set it to red, then while this is powered, because we're getting less than 30 frames, it will make that text red. Remember, it'll take about a second for it to kind of warm up and get to the 30 mark. So if we just turn these, I'm just going to group these emitters and turn them off so that we get the normal rate. After a second it gets up to speed, and now it's reading the actual number. You can see it's saying 31 there, which is because after a destroyer is powered, it will destroy the thing on the next frame. So we actually want to power this a little bit early. So I'm going to zoom into this with L1 and right on the D-pad, which kind of zooms it in widthwise. And then you start to see these columns going up and down, and these are actually 30th of a second frames of like logic frames for timing. So if we move that one frame early, we can see how that works. And now we get to a solid 30, which is correct. But now if we turn these emitters on, that's going to start hurting our frame rate, and we're going down to 21 now. And I'll just do a quick test to see how close that is to the actual readout here. So it's going down to 23, and it's saying about 23 there as well. So that's fairly accurate, but the logic is very simple and easy to make. And then we can set the emit speed down to 0, and it will just emit in one place instead of flying across your scene. Find the InDreams link for this creation in the description below. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something new. Go to patreon.com/TAPgiles to get 5 hours of tutorials early for $3. Here's a preview of what you can learn if you choose to become a supporter.